Okay, it's just about 6:30, so let's call the meeting to order, the June 24th board meeting. As I said, the current time is 6:30. At this time, I'd like to go around the room and do introductions, and I'm going to start again with you, Brian.
Thank you. Brian Bauer.
Mary Heather Noble,
Jaden McCallum.
Trisha Allen,
Ellen Whelan-Weiss,
Joanna Doria, Suzanne Buck,
Kristen Champion.
Chip Malcolm.
Barb Wilson
Wendy Baker,
Matt Carenti, Director of Finance and Operations.
and Steve.
Steve Borzek joining you from North Carolina in the middle of a very large thunderstorm, so hopefully I can stay connected for the meeting, but no promise.
Okay, and also Ellie.
she's driving.
Whoops, she's driving, so we saw her, right?
Okay.
Laura?
Laura.
Okay, great, awesome. At this time on the agenda, it is time to adopt the agenda. Can I have a motion?
I'll move to adopt or actually approve the agenda as one.
And second? And before we vote on this, there are a couple corrections that I noticed, of course, when I was doing my script. The first one is under report of the superintendent. I believe this should have been labeled as an action, board hiring approval protocol for July. So basically, what we're doing here is making sure, because we don't have board meetings in July, that we have the proper process set up. And I had that on my sheet and it didn't get typed in, okay? I have a couple of these, so are you okay with me just going through each one and then approving the amendments all at once? Okay, thank you. The next one is under report of the board for finance. And again, this one should have been labeled as an action as follows. Action, bill approval protocol for July. Again, because we're not meeting during the month of July. And the last one, and this was my omission, for the superintendent goal setting and evaluation process under report of the chair, I should have had an action underneath that because today what we're going to decide is, do we move forward with that contract that's in your meeting materials? And I should have put an action in place, and I forgot to do that on my agenda. Okay? Jason?
Does the approval of line of credit require an action step as well?
I'm sorry?
The approval of a line of credit, isn't that an action item as well?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good thing. So let's add that. Thank you. Thank you. So now we have 4 items. Thank you, Jason. So if there's no objection, I would like the agenda will be modified as corrected. And then if there's no objection, the agenda is approved as modified. So we did 2 steps. Okay, thank you. Public comments on agenda items. We have no public in the room. And Matt, can you check to see if we have any public? We do have 2. We have MCTV and 1 individual. If in fact you'd like to make a public comment, please indicate by raising your hand, your Zoom hand. Okay, so then we can move forward. And the next item is a recommendation to approve the June 10th meeting minutes. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
If there's no objection, the minutes are approved as submitted. Moving quickly here. Approve ACSD bills. I'm going to turn it over to Chip at this time.
There were
one set of bills read since the last meeting. There were basically 4 warrants. First one was the general account warrant for $607,580.68. And there is a warrant for $3,428.03. This was sort of a specific thing that came in at a different time, I guess.
General fund, you said, Chip?
That's, well, it's not defined. The vendor is Amazon Capital Services, Everybody Wins Vermont.
That's a majority.
Didn't say it, it did, oh, McGilvin Fund, I'm
Okay.
sorry,
Thank you.
there's too many things on there. It was a McGilvin Fund thing, I apologize, sorry. The third one was a payroll warrant for $494,551.24. And the fourth one is a large one for $4,012,615.63. This is basically, many teachers take the last check before the summer rather than taking individual checks over the summer. So this basically is, for those that are doing it that way, a large amount that is back again to cover them until they get their next check. Is that correct, Matt?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So Jason and I read those, and I move that we pay the bills.
I'll second.
If there is no objection, the bills are paid as reported by Chip. Next is report of the superintendent, and we're doing really well time-wise, so.
So the first item just addresses that we anticipate having several people finish the hiring process prior to your next meeting, the beginning of August. So it would be helpful if you would designate how they could be approved and ready to go. I'm very happy to have you delegate that to me, and I will report out all activity in August if that's your preference. I mean, obviously there are other ways you could get that done too, so it's just a request to do something so we can get everybody approved and ready to go.
Thoughts?
Sounds good to me.
Chip?
I move that we delegate the hiring to the superintendent. If in fact that has to happen before we next meet. Whatever wording you put in.
Yeah, I'll second.
Any discussion? And I'm gonna go ahead, Mary Heather.
I guess I just want to, just for clarity's sake, in the motion itself, designate a specific time period. Do you want like
This
just for
For the month
July?
of July.
Yeah, prior to August 1st is probably fine.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just clarification that we don't meet on August 1st though, so.
Yeah, but you do meet,
Those would just be held until.
exactly, fairly close to that though, so I think we
Okay,
do
all right,
okay.
just so long as that's not
Yep.
inconvenient for.
Because we're always meeting every 2 weeks anyway, so
Yeah, thank
there's
you,
always
Chip. Yeah.
a delay. Any other discussion? Okay, so all those in favor of giving Dr. Baker authorization to approve the appointments for the month of July until August 1st, indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
There's always random.
Excellent. So you have the authority. Phew,
To the kingdom.
next.
Okay, seems as though Suzanne read these.
In the past?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is that how you'd
So
like
we
to do
have,
that?
there's personnel actions that are listed on the agenda. So at this point in time, could I have a motion?
I move to appoint Michaela Bicknell, social worker 1.0 FTE, Victoria Flynn, special educator 1.0 FTE, Jason Huntoon, math teacher 1.0 FTE Josephine Sinopoli, classroom teacher 1.0 FTE Samuel Luz, school counselor 1.0 FTE Adelaide Brooks, another classroom teacher 1.0 FTE, and to accept the resignation of Margaret Baker and Bridget Sullivan.
Second.
Excellent. Any discussion?
Yes, I have a question. Michaela Bicknell is classified as a social worker on step 5. Where does she fit into the discussions about the reorganization of support personnel? Is she step 5 on the teaching contract? Or could I just want a little clarification on where that fits in?
Yep, Steve, she is doing work that's consistent with a social worker endorsement, and therefore she's on the teacher contract with a provisional license for that work.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All those in favor of approving the appointments and resignations as reported in the warning as well as read by Suzanne, indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
No.
Okay. Next.
So the legislative session is over, and we do have a yield bill, and we thought it was prudent to just take a minute and talk a little bit about what we need to be paying close attention to. And so Matt's prepared some thoughts around doing that we'd like to share tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, so as we now finally have a yield bill, it seems important to bring an update forward. This bill is normally a really simple one-pager that throws out a couple of numbers, and that's it. This year's, I think, is 137 pages, and there's a lot in there. So it seemed important to sort of mention it. It's still early on for a lot of the mandates that this bill sets forth, but I'll walk through some of the highlights so that you guys have an introduction to those, and then we'll be providing regular updates as we learn more heading into the school year. So first and foremost, the yield was set at $9,893. The income dollar equivalent yield, so if you're paying an income, that's $10,110, and then a non-homestead property tax rate of $1.39. What that means for ACSD is that our equalized district tax rate, which is the pre-CLA rate, is $1.497. So if we round up $1.50, that brings us in 3 cents above our FY24 equalized district tax rate of $1.47, which is I think about 1.9% up. It's worth noting that the yield was flirting with that $10,000 mark all the way to the finish line. At the last minute, what the state did was they took a $20 million chunk of funding, and instead of spreading it across the entire pot to raise that yield, they used it to target property tax credit year-to-year hardship for folks, and so that $20 million all got applied to the tax credits. That kept the yield a little bit below 10,000. If it had crossed 10, as everyone has heard me say, we would have been right at that $1.47. Now, worth remembering that because of the way that the discount is set up, we're getting a 13-cent discount to achieve that $1.50 this year. So that's actually $1.63 based on our per pupil spending, which means that a 0% budget in FY26 combined with the shrinking discount, because the discount shrinks by 20%, which is a 3-cent shrink, will raise that equalized district tax rate another 3 cents at 0% budget increase. So that's just something to keep in our minds. Other things that the yield bill did, it created a commission on the future of public education in Vermont. I think it's the 39th study that the legislature has commissioned in the last 12 years. Or no, since 2002. We've had a lot of studies. Anyways, this commission is responsible for making recommendations for a statewide vision for the future of public education. We know that the SBA, VSBA, VPA, VASBO, all of the professional organizations will have representation for the first time in this commission. Elizabeth Jennings, who's the business manager at Addison Northwest, has been nominated from the business manager organization. So we're lucky to have sort of a local lobbyist in the works there. Other than that, we've got some new language that's going to have to go on the ballots. We have AOE requirement to add recommendations for reserve fund balance standards. So we're going to be taking a hard look at what happens to fund balance at the end of the year and what the reserve designations for those funds can be. There is a new position at education finance data analyst position going to be added. We are repealing the suspension on ballot language I just said. This is the other one. An Ed Fund Advisory Committee to monitor Vermont's education finance system, conduct analysis, and make recommendations on updating the pupil weights and other aspects of the Ed Fund. So we have a committee and a commission. They're also looking at the CLA and going to be repealing the excess spending threshold for FY26. In FY26, that excess spending threshold will be 118% of the statewide average district per pupil ed spending for FY25 plus inflation. So what does that mean? It means that basically a budget is allowed to, a budget that's on the upper end of the threshold, and we know from where that scatter chart placed us last year that we're one of those districts. Anything that exceeds the year-to-year inflation rate is going to sort of flirt with the excess spending threshold as far as a growth constraint on our budget.
So Matt, maybe for some of the new board members, we can give some background that because of the weighting study, they basically put a hold on that. And also, I think the pandemic might have had something to do with that.
A lot of flux, a lot of unknown, yeah. So the weighted, because of all of the shifting, tectonic plates and funding mechanisms, they did suspend the threshold for the last, 4 years?
Yeah.
3 or 4 years?
Yeah. And this is basically saying, no, we're not going to do that anymore, right?
Yeah, I mean, there had been talk of keeping it suspended all the way up to, to 2030 to give the full 5-year implementation of Act 127. But as we all know, plans change and they're bringing it back. So
Yeah.
We're sort of already starting to see some guardrails go up around budget growth, not just for us, but for districts across the state. And it's going to certainly be something that we talk about during the budget drivers presentation in a couple months here. We'll leave it quick and there for now. Does anyone have any quick questions? I don't want to take up too much time with this right now.
Mary Heather, and then Steve.
So just to clarify, the guardrails that you're talking about, they're bringing it back for 26, or they're saying that they're postponing it for 26?
Back for 26.
Back for 26.
Yeah.
118% of the statewide average.
Is how high you can go before you trigger some kind of.
Yeah.
Across the threshold.
Double
We don't know what
taxation.
the penalty, if that's, it's gonna be the double taxation again.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Steve?
So Matt, you said 118%. Where are we in relation to that? Because I know that for several years before they got rid of it, we were pretty close to the double tax rate. So based on that 118%, do you know where we fall right now? would we get hit by the double tax penalty if it was implemented today?
Yeah, Steve, I'm not sure exactly where we fall relative to the statewide average. That'll be a number that we gain some clarity on over the next couple of months. But I think it's safe to say that because we are in the high end of the bottom sixth of highest spending districts. Remember that scatter chart where we looked at where we are? We're one of those highest discounted districts. I think that, based on our distribution relative to the rest of the field, that it's safe to expect that we are going to be right around that threshold when that average comes out. We know that there are plenty of districts out there who are drastically under where we are in terms of that per pupil ed spending. I just don't know exactly how much cap room we're going to have to work with. But again, we have that inflation number as the floor. I think that's what they've said, is that if you're a high spending district, you can always grow at the rate of inflation. It's just you can't grow any faster than that once you are at the threshold.
So it's based on growth.
So
It's the delta.
Yeah.
It's the delta.
Yeah.
From what we are this year versus what would be next year.
Mhm.
And this is with, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mary Heather and Ellen.
It occurs to me that this being kind of an extraordinary year where a lot of districts have been forced to make budget cuts and budget cuts and budget cuts means, as a district that was already a higher spending district and that passed our budget with slight but increases in the spending, means that gap may have widened even more.
And it puts us further away from the average, perhaps.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I just wanted to bring in the discounted rate as well. So where we would be sitting, like per Steve's question, even with the discounted rate, we would still be pretty close, if not bumping up right up against, I'm assuming. Or is that?
It's spending, so it's the discounted rate gets put onto the tax rate.
Right.
So my guess is this would be applied to the per pupil spending. So they're two separate things.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That's what I understand.
When will we know the statewide average?
Once everyone has a budget.
which is
How many are left?
like 3 or 4.
Yeah, off the top of my head, it's
So
not
we still
more
have
than
a chart, so there wasn't too many black.
Yeah, July 1st should be the end of it.
Yeah.
So we will know.
Sure, soon. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure AOE will send that data out as soon as we have it. We'll let you guys know. So.
And Chip?
A comment relative to the wide disparity between us at 16 and schools that didn't pass their budget till 5, which are like 7 or 8 or 9 at the most. It just seems like these kinds of rules are going to be pushed by the state to basically mediocritize the whole system, okay? And I know we can't exactly explain what the difference is between that low number of some districts and our number or districts that are even higher than us. But we know we have a good district, okay? And it's always disheartening because I just see it trying to work a way to mediocritize systems. I know it's in the realm of equity and all of that, but it is still very uncomfortable down the road, I think.
Joanna?
Just a quick question, can you remind me, Matt, is it 5 years of the tapering of the discount? So it's 20, it'll drop 20%, is it?
Yeah, each year.
That's correct.
Okay.
3 cents for 5 years.
And based on the 4 decimal point rounding that they do, our drop this year is from 13 cents to 10 cents. So it's a big 20%.
Anyone else?
It looks to me like on this last sheet that I got from AOE that the preliminary average set at 13,292. And we're at 16,099. So,
Can you repeat those numbers, please?
yes, 13,292. Looks like the average, I need to confirm that this is the true average, but versus 16,099 for ACSD.
So we're 18% over.
What?
Right at it.
Right at it. Can't spend anything else.
Oh, gosh. Ready for approval of line of credit?
Yes.
What are we
Okay.
gonna do?
After this happy moment.
As long as the interest is zero, that's
I've got a really big credit card. All right. Thank you for the segue. Every year, we need to borrow funds in order to meet the cash flow obligations in FY25. So annually, we ask the board to approve the creation of a tax anticipation note, which is a financial instrument that allows ACSD to borrow funds against the anticipated tax revenue from the state and member towns. We ask that you please approve the following motion. That the school board vote to approve a $4,802,247 operating line of credit from the National Bank of Middlebury due no later than June 30th, 2024 at an interest rate of 4.69%. Authorize the treasurer, business manager, and assistant business manager to borrow against the line of credit as needed on behalf of the board.
So moved.
I'll second. I have a question.
I have a question.
Jason.
Doesn't the line of credit need to go into 2025?
Yeah, that was my question.
June 30th, 24 doesn't give you much time.
We'll give you like less than a week to pay it off.
No. The school board vote has to happen by the end of June. So that's the,
Can you read that again? I think,
Yeah.
read the motion.
that the
Yeah.
school board votes to approve a $4,802,247 operating line of credit from the National Bank of Middlebury due no later than June 30th, 2024 at an interest rate of 4.69%. And authorize the treasurer, business manager, and assistant business manager to borrow against the line of credit as needed on behalf of the board.
So the June,
What is the do no later?
Yeah, that real, yeah.
That sounds like it's actually
I-
due.
Yeah, so that's the same language that we use every year, but I believe that what that sentence is referring to is when the board's approval is due in order to
Okay.
allow the bank to write the note on our behalf. Yeah.
So that doesn't have to be in the motion.
Well, it does.
Yeah,
If it's
technically, I think you could probably.
But is there a way to clarify? I mean, if it needs to be in there, fine, but can we add something? Yeah, with the-
Proceeded.
I thought it
Yeah.
made sense.
Yeah.
So this is a recommended motion, and the motion can be made in any way by any board member.
Well, it's been moved and seconded, so at
Right.
this point we'd be talking about.
right, we're, Brian,
Yes, what will that cost the district?
The cost of borrowing money is 4.69% of the,
And that means how many dollars? you think?
I think last year, the interest that we wound up paying on the one time that we did need to draw from it was under $5,000.
Thank you.
Chip, and then
And
Suzanne.
last year was one of the first years we've used that especially because Middlebury changed to a 2-time-a-year tax. So they didn't put their bills out until like November, right, or whatever, and Middlebury was the biggest check that comes in. So,
Suzanne?
So the only comment I have is next time we have something like this, could we make sure that the actual documents in board pack
Yeah, agree.
so that we can see it, because we don't have it, and typically we do have this document. So that might have also helped us under questions, but
Yeah.
I mean-
Absolutely.
I don't even think, Matt, that with what you said twice, that I could repeat it into a
Exactly.
motion with the exact
Yeah,
language.
sorry, I thought it was in board packet.
So-
Darcy had it from.
Jamie,
I think that if I'm hearing people right, the confusion is about the word due. What if the word due was changed to like completed? Because then it would be like the vote and the authorization has to be completed by June 30th. If you read the sentence with that word, would it make sense?
would you like to amend it?
I don't know.
Well, can Matt read it with that proposed amendment before we?
We have to amend it though, if we're gonna do this.
Right,
We're discussing.
but we just
We're
wanna,
discussing it.
we just wanna hear it.
That the school board vote to approve a $4,802,247 operating line of credit from the National Bank of Millbury. What am I changing it to?
Completed.
Completed by no later than June 30th, 2020.
Doesn't really make sense.
Proceeded with the board's action due by. Board action,
Where's
whatever it is.
Authorization by June 30th?
Which is what we are doing currently,
Yes,
so I don't even know that the word is necessary.
I'm wondering if the wording is necessary, because we're actually doing it, so why does that have to be in the motion?
Yeah.
Do we know what it means?
Yeah, it seems like you could just take out due no later than June 30th.
Yeah.
I just think it, yeah,
So I went back to last June when we did this, and it is online, and so last year's motion stated approve a $3,125,422 operating line of credit from the National Bank of Middlebury due no later than June 30th, 2024. So we should say 2025.
okay.
Well, that
Thank you,
makes sense.
Suzanne.
It's just a typo.
It's a typo.
All right.
So it was easier than we thought.
Yeah, so we do need to vote
So
to amend.
We're going to.
Yes.
Yes. So can I have someone make a motion to,
That we adopt that verbiage with the corrected date to June 30th, 2025.
Second.
second, okay. So technically, we have to make a motion to amend the date.
Or I can withdraw my motion.
Okay, do you want to do that?
But we already moved.
Yeah, we've already moved
We've already
and seconded.
Right,
Yeah.
So now we need to discuss and vote.
So can you word your motion a little different? To basically say, I'd like to amend
I would like to
amend it to change.
move to amend the date to reflect the correct date of June 30th, 2025.
Perfect. Can I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Cool. So now we can vote on the original amended motion that, and I can't say that whole thing he just
Right.
read, but it is due June 30th, 2025. I know that much. So all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Perfect. So you have your line of credit approved.
I need everyone's signature.
Okay.
I'm gonna pass this around.
Okay.
It's just the majority, so. And Mary Heather, there's 2 extra lines for you.
Here's your special. Okay, excellent.
Start that with you. That's page 3 that you're signing.
Moving on?
Yep.
So, I'm guessing that in years past, at some point in time after the budget has passed, then you're aware that conversations begin in schools about class size configuration and teacher assignment and what all that looks like. Once you have a past budget, you know how many staff you have and you're able to really begin to do some planning. And that's typically, you know, of course, in March, and then, you know, if the kindergartners are becoming more apparent, registration, you know, activities has either, depending on where you are, finished or is almost finished. And so, so numbers of students are coming into play and the information is together. So when I was transitioning in March, those conversations had begun, and Tim was having conversations with principals about sort of where they are and what things we're looking at and how to move ahead. There is an annual report required of the superintendent for policy D6, which is about class sizes, which is a little bit of a Pandora's box. Because when you are determining if you have a class size that is either under the guidelines of 10 or over the guidelines of either 20 or 24, depending on the age of the student, then you have to determine what to do. And what to do sometimes, you know, takes a lot of conversation because it has a cascading impact on other things and runs into other requirements like, you know, a need for a coordinated curriculum, right, which is required by law, or the number of times that teachers are with students multiple years in a row, you know, things like that. You know, grade configurations that come up that are more than you'd expect. So there's lots involved in that process, and Courtney has done a beautiful job putting together materials that just explain what that conversation was like here, and it really focuses on a few diverse examples as a way to lead you through what that looks like. So that's what we'd like to share with you tonight.
That's going to drive this Canva presentation, which is on this, is what, as Dr. Baker said, this D6 policy that Matt could go to the next slide, is accompanied on the board website by the guidelines procedure. So, perfect. The policy really is quite broad, as a lot of the policies are. It basically says that class size guidelines will be used to inform annual decisions related to staffing and program offerings. And from there, the guidelines are based on Vermont's EQS, and they really outline what the minimum and maximum class sizes are for different grade bands in ACSD. The guidelines recognize, I mean, this is really verbatim language, that there's a correlation between class size and student achievement. It's a broad statement. There's a correlation between class size and financial resources, and it says there's a need for flexibility and additional factors. So that this is a report to you on really our experience in using this policy and guidelines this spring, as a few of our schools work through the process of determining grade configurations. So our guiding considerations when using the policy and guidelines for students, we wanted to ensure that our grade configuration decisions were made in a way that promoted equitable access to all students for high-quality curricular, instructional, and social-emotional experiences. And those were three equally important factors that we took into consideration in every instance. And then for our staff and our schools, we wanted to enable high-quality instruction in every classroom and make sure that our professionals were placed in a place that they were highly trained and supported to do their best work in. So this year we used D6 to provide support most actively in three really different situations in ACSD schools, and I want to say that I went into each of those situations with, I don't want to say a bias, but an understanding of the way things probably should shake out, and left with a different understanding. And I think that's because of, you see that little list of stakeholders down at the bottom, but because of the people who are in the conversation and because of all the stones that got unturned through those conversations, it was really 3 for 3, that I learned new things and I think school communities learn new things from each other. So we assessed this policy for this review with an eye toward ensuring equity for all of our students in ACSD. We wanted to enable meaningful conversations among our stakeholders while also leaning to local control. So it wasn't our goal to come in and tell our schools what was best for them, but instead to engage with them and their stakeholders in a way that we understood what was unfolding and to share our perspectives from the central office sort of lens and hear their perspectives. And to identify existing barriers to equitable access to our high-quality coordinated curriculum. So configurations that prompted this review, the review is used in a few senses in this presentation. One, we're doing a review of the policy, but then in doing that, we also started reviewing class configurations for SY 24-25. And situations or configurations that prompted a review of what a school was thinking they might outline for their class structures next year were any instance where class sizes were proposed with fewer than 10 students, any class configurations that would need to combine more than 2 grades to reach 10 students, or class configurations that may prevent access for all students to our full curriculum in academic areas. And that third one means any scenario in which a grade level of students was going to miss 1 or more grades of our coordinated curriculum, or repeat. And when we went into these conversations, I would say these 3 considerations are prioritized. Number 1, we wanted to know who are the students? Who are our learners? What are their needs? What makes them diverse? What are their strengths? And who are they together as a learning community in a grade level? What are their academic and social emotional strengths and needed supports? From there, we wanted to identify and discuss curricular opportunities and implications, and I think we found that this was an area that was perhaps under-considered in the past, at least in a way that looked beyond 1 year. So if schools were looking at what are we going to do next year, there might not have been a consideration for and the next year and the next year and the next year, which is what we found ourselves juggling in a couple of situations in terms of what curriculum students had already had and what we could offer them in the future. And then after identifying the right curricular opportunity for the right group of students, identifying and discussing teacher expertise, because our teachers have specialized, their licenses might cover a broad swath of grades, but many of them, especially at the elementary level, have specialized training or experience in a limited number of grades. That's those 3 considerations, and I feel pretty confident in saying that coming out of these conversations, there were some areas of disagreement and there were some areas of agreement, and I think these are emerging agreements from stakeholders involved. Number 1, whenever possible, class configurations should aim for at least 10 students. This supports high-impact instructional practices. It supports social emotional development and social skill development. The ability to group students in certain ways, have flexibility in your groupings, and teach to a range of learners. Whenever possible, more than 2 grades should not be combined. Combining more than 2 grade levels can have significant curricular implications. It can present challenges to social skill development, and it really does demand quite a significant amount of teacher and additional curricular instructional resources. So in the instance that you were going to combine 2 or more, 3 or more grades, you're really looking at the required state standards for every grade level, the different curricular programs we use to meet those standards and requirements. In our contract, we stipend teachers who teach 3 or more grades an additional amount of money for this work. And then in often cases, in any of these scenarios, we're paying teachers over the summer to pull apart the curriculum and reconfigure it with curriculum specialists to make sure that we're doing the very best we can for our students who are gonna have a hybrid curriculum. And third, whenever possible, students should not have the same teacher for more than 2 years. If you think of a 6-year formative elementary experience, having any one teacher 3 of those 6 years is 50% of a student's time in that school. And that limits their access to different relationships and different diverse educational and pedagogical approaches, diminishes the possibility of student access to teachers with specialized training. So the previous slide listed 3 things. One, not having a teacher more than 2 years, trying not to have fewer than 10 students in a classroom, and in the third column, Matt, can you go back one?
More than 2 grades.
And not providing more than 2 grades in a single classroom. Thank you.
That was really a quiz for us.
Yeah, good job. But it didn't outline curricular considerations. And in January of this year, I presented to you all on our coordinated curriculum, how we got to where it is, the components of it, how it aligns with Act 173. And in preparing this presentation, I went back to that presentation and to the AOE technical guidance on coordinated curriculum. And I pulled out, I think, a few key phrases. The first bullet says the board of each supervisory union or district shall ensure that each school implements the supervisory union's written and delivered curriculum, which we have and which we're proud of. So we have that and we want to deliver it and implement it. The second bullet, instruction and intervention can only be effective when there's a continuous improvement process for developing and sustaining a comprehensive system that cultivates expertise, promotes collaboration, and uses high-quality data effectively to make good decisions. And I left this bullet in here because I think what it's starting to get at in the MTSS field guide is that when we know what we teach at Tier 1, we can start at Tier 2 and Tier 3 identifying student supports. But until we can say, this student had our Tier 1 curriculum, it's hard to identify if there's a gap in the learning because there's a gap in our curriculum, the student hasn't received it, or because the student needs supports because they've had that curriculum and more support is still needed. And so I think the field guide is getting at that. Schools should have a coordinated curriculum so that we know what our students are receiving. And then this third bullet, the responsibility to provide high-quality instruction and intervention for all students does not rest on the shoulders of teachers alone. It's critical that professionals at every level take responsibility for creating conditions for excellence. And I think that this policy and this, the guidelines that support it are getting at this, that there's a board level interest in class sizes, and then as Dr. Baker says, when we go to look at class sizes, all of the implications that lie under trying to stick within those guidelines. I took this slide right from the January presentation, but coordinated curriculum, I think, to my delight, is a phrase that's getting used more and more, but for the sake of sharing a common definition of what it means, I took this definition from the technical guidance. A common language that connects expectations and practices across all schools in the district, wherein students are exposed to the same standards, content, concepts, and skills across a grade level, regardless of classroom or context. That's what our units of inquiry do. They're required, teachers are required to outline, we start with the concepts and then go to the content, but the concepts, the content, and the skills, and the standards at each grade level is what we've articulated. And Marzano has identified a guaranteed and viable curriculum as the #1 school level factor impacting student achievement.
Question?
Yes.
I guess I really don't understand that paragraph. Because it's talking about treating everybody the same. And that's not what we're supposed to be able to do because these students have different abilities, different levels. And this says we're gonna treat them the same, we're gonna provide the same things to all the students.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I understand that tension. And our teachers say, we talk about that. If you were to look at our unit planner, I'm gonna say third grade teachers from across ACSD, first look at the standards. In our case, they begin with the social studies and the science standards. So the state says, we are beholden to teaching these standards for this grade level. So we look at those, and then our teachers look at where they overlap and identify the big concepts that they say, we want all of our third graders to have these big concepts that we can take away from the standards. And from there, they outline the content. So if the standard is maybe, or if the concept is, say, metamorphosis, they might look through the standards and find examples of metamorphosis and where they could teach it in this big, broad concept.
So what you're saying is that there is flexibility in the situation.
Yeah, that's where I was getting. On the third page of the unit planner, teachers identify how they're going to differentiate for their learners. And we say that is a teacher's wheelhouse. Once they get there, they're differentiating for there. Sorry, I could go deep into the unit planner. Because I would have gotten there quite slowly. This is small, which is why you have a hard copy in front of you. But here's some considerations that we looked at as we were going through the process of working with these 3 schools this spring. In this first horizontal line, we found that there's variability in some of our smaller elementary schools, and the variability in class sizes prevents us from creating a predictable configuration. That's not always true. So it's not really about size of school, it's more about the unpredictability of the configurations themselves. In the example next to it, if you had a school that predictably held a K1 combined, a 2-3, and a 4-5, that's one example wherein the configuration is so predictable that we can ensure every student who comes through that school is going to have each year of our coordinated curriculum, and we know when they're going to get it and how they're going to get it, and that they're not going to repeat. Wherein, and this is a made-up example, but if you have a school, let's say this year, that had a straight K, and then a combined 1-2, and a straight 3, and a combined 4-5, but the next year went to combining a K1 and then running a straight 2 and 3 and then maintaining that 4 and 5, you're going to get in a situation, if you map this out over time, where somebody is going to have to repeat, someone either in that K1 area or the 2-3 area, depending on how you decide to move forward over the years, is going to repeat a year of the coordinated curriculum or miss a year of the coordinated curriculum. And I could say more about that. A couple slides back, we talked about all the things that we do and the resources we send in when that happens. And we do that, and I think when we do, we end up with something that is the very best effort we can provide, and it's not for a lack of trying, which is what this second line gets at. When gaps emerge, we do our best, and really people are working exhaustively to look at solutions and to figure out what resources and people can we move to help this situation. And then something that can occur when that happens is that those resources and people are moved to support a situation away from another environment, even within the same school. So if you have a paraeducator who's moved to support a tricky combination, they're being moved into that and away from somewhere else that they could be providing support in the school. And then the third is we're finding that we're not looking very far ahead in our curricular planning, which makes sense. The budget passes in March. It's a sprint to the end of the school year. We're trying to get all of our ducks in a row. We're trying to hire. We're trying to put people with the right licenses in the right places. And it's not really on many people's minds to, map out the next 4 years of a student's coordinated curriculum in May. But we want to move towards that more often, so that students aren't, to any extent possible, we're preventing students from overlapping or being left with gaps in the curriculum.
Courtney, can you address the last point that the student or the teacher might lose access to the horizontally aligned grade level here?
Yeah, so we have our grade level teams, all of the first grade teachers in the district, all of the second grade teachers, they meet by grade level team. And there's some teachers who don't mind jumping from year to year. If you're in a 4-5, if you always have a 4-5, you might this current year be teaching the fourth grade units to your combined 4 or 5 class, so you're on the 4th grade team. But next year, when you are going to be teaching the 5th grade units, you join the 5th grade team, so that when you meet monthly, you're all looking at what's the unit that's coming up, what are the early literacy scope and sequence strategies embedded with that unit, what is the math that we're looking at for the unit coming up, and you're having those conversations as a grade level team. So we do have teachers that jump back and forth, but we also have teachers who've been on the same team now for going on almost a decade, and they might not want to move. And so when they suddenly get placed in an unexpected grade level or combination, it may or may not be hard for them to move. We also have grade level leaders, and so that person holds over time the history of that group and take notes and sets the agendas. And we had a scenario this year where a grade level leader was going to be moved to a different grade, and therefore the grade was going to be left without a leader. So it impacts the broader system of the team. So these are anticipated, I don't know if they're anticipated challenges, but they're challenges that we, maybe even limitations of the guidelines that we uncovered as we were going into the schools. Projected enrollment dips and bubbles within our smaller elementary schools are predicted to continue, resulting in inconsistently large and small cohorts. And the impacts of this can include class configurations that are inconsistent year to year, class configurations that result in students having a teacher for more than 2 years, moving teachers away from their anticipated or specialized area of expertise, and unanticipated and unavoidable gaps in curriculum scope and sequence. So the current policy guidance, if we were to give you a report on our experience with the policy and the guidelines, it's that the guidance isn't quite sufficient enough to inform actions the superintendent is empowered to take in these situations. And we have a review of this slide in a minute, but first we wanted to just have you look at the data, and then a re-summary of this slide comes after the data. So this is our fall kindergarten enrollment data. This data comes from Meg Baker, our UPK coordinator. This data and the data on the next slide is from last week. It's pretty fluid data, it's changing. I'm sure by this week you could find a change in it, but as of last Thursday, this is what our kindergarten looks like, and Bridgeport, Ripton, and Weybridge are the areas where we're combining at least 2 grades to get close to, well, in all 3 of those situations, to reach 10. And then this is, I pulled these numbers, kindergarten from Meg Baker, and the section numbers from our Power School enrollment. So again, they might not be precise as of today, but this is our projected configuration for next year.
Is it possible to ask a question at this point?
Sure. Go ahead, Brian.
All right. In your opinion, if all the elementary students in the district were combined in one school, would you find what you're trying to accomplish easier to do?
Can you say the question again?
Sure.
Or maybe slightly differently?
Take all the elementary schools that you have there,
Uh-huh.
and you combine all the students and put them in one place, and put them in their appropriate grades. Would you be able to do what you're trying to accomplish easier?
If it was one elementary school, Brian.
Yes.
Well, yes, Mary Hogan doesn't have this challenge in this same way, but neither does Weybridge at the moment, because they have a K1, a 2, 3, and a 4, 5. So it's not necessarily size, it's consistency. If enrollment was steady all along, you could have 10 in the K1 and 10 in the 2, 3, and 10 in the 4, 5 every year, 30 kids in a school, and we've gotten away from all the problems that Courtney is talking about.
It's more of a thought question for the future.
Yeah, there are lots of ways that we could probably move over this.
Tricia.
Well, to sort of piggyback on that, absolutely understand the difference between consistency and size. And I know you've been saying you haven't been mapping out as far ahead, but do you have historic data about that consistency? Is it about the same across all rural schools? Are there some rural schools that have more of those dips and highs and lows, or that sort of thing?
Yeah, I'm not the one to be sure about historical questions at this point, in my tenure with ACSD, but there are some schools that seem to have more variability just based on, the availability of housing in the area or lack of availability of housing, so it just kind of depends. Yeah.
Turnover too.
Yep.
Admin and teacher turnover quickly leads to sort of a amnesia or loss of records about what has been.
Mary Heather.
Well, just to follow up on Tricia's question, I know in some of the prior reports that Dr. Williams provided, he provided kind of a historic grid of student populations and grade cohorts over the years. So we do have the data, and it does show this is a problem that central office often has to grapple with at the end of a year planning for the next year. And I do think there are some schools for which it's more problematic than others. I think like Cornwall, Middlebury, probably even Shoreham, it's not quite as troublesome, but yeah, that changes over time, and we have the data to look at it, and we should. I guess I've got a couple of other questions. One, I'm sort of curious the degree to which central office also considered the IB and NEASC accreditation process, and whether there's impacts, considerations there that ought to be on our minds, as decisions are made from year to year. And then also just the teacher experience. Certainly, as we should be, very student focused on the student experience and the student's ability to receive a coordinated curriculum and really troubleshoot when that's at risk. But I'm also curious about the equity with respect to a teacher's experience in a school and a teacher's, being expected to, teach this curriculum and that curriculum from year to year, or have 3 different sort of standards imposed on them from a K-1-2 perspective, or even just, the changing class. Just the sort of almost disruptive nature from year to year and what that does to a teaching experience and how that teaching experience varies across the district. I'm wondering if that has been a consideration as well.
As far as NEASC IB goes, it wasn't a specific lens we used for this. I'm not sure what else I would say about that, except we're going to start our self-study with all of our teachers towards our what's called collaborative learning protocol for NEASC IB next October. And I think underpinnings of this might come up in that, but it's not like a direct, this doesn't have a direct impact on that self-study. The teacher versus student thing is interesting because you could find yourself in a situation where, do you want to center the student first or the teacher first, and can you really separate those two things? Because once you destabilize a teacher's sense of home or interest or effectiveness, if moving them to a certain grade level or configuration is what you think might be best for the students, if they don't feel that way, the purpose is kind of lost. So that was an interesting conversation to have, for sure. I don't think there's a right or wrong.
I will say that, I had the pleasure of just listening to teachers, along the way as this was kind of evolving. I mean, Courtney did the lion's share of the work behind this, but one of the things that I found very consistent was that our teachers they were without exception willing to step up to whatever was asked of them, which, is an important point to make. And we were able to provide the supports they asked for 100% of the time in terms of extra time, curriculum coordination support, whatever it was, to be able to make tough assignments seem more doable. That said, the points of agreement that Courtney put up there, those were really shared by everyone. The teachers really are on the same page as everyone else, that this kind of variability diminishes their ability to be effective, in that sense. They can't quite get really good at the thing that they'd like to get really good at. And if they have to move, because this is the third or fourth year that they've had students, they might be moving from a certain grade to a grade that's fairly far away from another grade that they've taught. And so it's a big change, and so these are a set of conditions that we see continuing to exist. And I think as Courtney alluded, there is not policy guidance as to how to solve this in a way that doesn't perpetuate these solutions, which are not recommended as for high impact learning environments.
I have a question. Did any of these accommodations, were they considering the larger class size ones? Are those because we didn't have the additional teachers to make more sections or to split them into two? Or is it because we thought that these were the right size groups to have together?
That's a good question.
And I'm thinking specifically like in the 3 and 4 in Middlebury, the 18 students, they could have had 13 or 14 and have 4 sections.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Salisbury could have had 10 and 3 and 10 and 2. I mean, obviously there might have been 3 kids in second grade and 18 or 17.
Matt comes in here a little bit, but during budget season, which is, way before the budget's passed in March, and this is my first year doing this, but Matt and Nicole and I went around, and Tim joined us sometimes, at the different schools to look at, given the budget and given your enrollment, what makes sense for a number of teachers for you to have for next year, given projected enrollment. So by the time the budget's passed and grant funding is taken into account, principals pretty much know the staff they have to work with, at least the number of staff people they have to work with. And from there, they're trying to figure out how to split them. So Jen Kravitz talks every year about how her challenge in this is she always has to figure out which 2 grades are going to have only 3 sections. And so she's going through this process every year, going through those same things. And when I asked her about it, she had multiple documents that guide her through this process. And she involves the whole school to decide, which grade levels are going to have more sections than others.
Ellen, go ahead. Jen? I was just gonna say, I think to that point, Courtney, there's variability in all the schools, some a lot more than others, but it sounds like even in Mary Hogan, where the population's much more steady, there are teachers who are gonna be switching grades year to year based on that decision. And I don't it occurs to me in looking at that one particular school that one of the asks that the Mary Hogan teachers brought before the board in March was for consistency in 4 sections across all the grades. And I would imagine, I think I just looked at their remarks and they specifically talked about safety and security for students and teachers, but I would also imagine that that's about a certain steadiness in that planning as well. That's speculation.
Every school's so unique, right, in like how it functions year to year, but what makes Middlebury unique in our district is those teachers have colleagues with whom they can collaborate within the building, whereas in all the other buildings, you have to go outside of the building to find your grade level collaborators. So in Mary Hogan, when your teaching assignment is changed, your local team is changed, and that can be a team you've been with for a decade. So that brings like a new level of, and sometimes people want that. It happens at moms too, team changes. But that's just a different cultural experience for sure.
Sure.
Thanks for presenting this. I don't think we've had as detailed a presentation over at least a long time anyway. I remember about the complexity of this 10-dimensional chess that you're constantly having to do. And honestly, it's one of those things which it comes up in community conversation only, and where the board is not really responsible except for the budget and how many people are in that budget. But when your kid is in one of these situations that is awkward as a parent for that child, you think that comes to you, comes to the principal, and it also filters into us too. Not that we can always I can't ever answer the question, but I appreciate the presentation because it shows how complex it is, how fluid it is, and even as somebody pointed out, even at our largest school, it's still multi-dimensional, and it's just not putting it all together. It gets much smaller with these much more difficult with the smaller numbers. And one of the things all of the peer groups, even gender, it was years ago, I think Cornwall had 14 boys and no girls in one age range. It was just, those can add another whole level of complexity too.
Ellie?
Yeah, my son is one of those 6 students in the 5th grade in Salisbury, so we've been experiencing this since kindergarten. And the gender thing is big. I think it's like 4 girls and 2 boys or something.
Right.
So it's like, here's your friend.
Yeah. Mary Heather.
I'm curious if you guys are able to share just some of the feedback concerns that both teachers and family members, I think it would be helpful for the board to just hear that if we even have time, but just some of the highlights of some of those conversations that were had, just so that we can have a sense of what's, ever present on the mind of both groups.
It's actually a good review of Courtney's presentation. It might even lead us into the last slide. Because what's interesting to me, just kind of listening to this conversation within Addison Central for the first time, is that a lot of things are opposing, right? So parents really would like to have their student move on from a teacher after 2 years, right? That's perfectly understandable. In order to do that, then there's another configuration issue that needs to come up, which that then upsets others, right? Because maybe it means that there have to be 6 students in a cohort, which is below the minimum, right, requirements. But that's the only way in the puzzle that it can be accomplished that another set of students doesn't have a teacher for a 3rd year in a row. It's really, that problem of we have to get a boat from the New York side to the Vermont side, and Sally can't ride with John, and Jamie has to ride with Joe, and the dog can only go under these circumstances. It really is that, all the way through. So those were issues. Large considerations from everyone about putting more than 2 grades together. That 3rd grade, that is something that, you know, we all threw a flag on that play to say, wait a minute, are we actually teaching 3 years of math in this scenario? Are we really doing literacy? Because the developmental age of a kindergartner to a second grader is probably age 3 to 11.
Yeah.
You know, so that's why, as Courtney pointed out, I mean, when that has happened, there have been a lot more resources that are in that circumstance. So if you have that, you know, if you don't have that, well, then you have a class of 4, right? Or, you know, or 6, and then you have parents that say, I don't want my child without peers. So, you know, there's often in the same, I think almost every time in the same school, actually, there are multiple possibilities and there are tensions that are arising in each of those scenarios. So if you implement one, you've caused a problem in another, you know, and that made it very, very difficult, you know, in all of these particular cases. And I would expect those conditions to continue it might not be the same school every year, but certainly. And I think what's hard for me coming into this role is it's not clear what the policy guidance is for me. Like, what is the relief I'm able to provide? You know, and there are many different options often suggested to me, but in doing so, those all have ramifications, right? So, and some of them long-term. So that doesn't feel within the superintendent's wheelhouse without policy guidance.
Jason and Suzanne?
You touched on it already, and I just wanted to ask like why you decided to do 3 grades in Ripton for K through 2.
I would go back to say it was a local decision that we supported, and that's an example of a situation that I went into thinking, how could we ever do this? And in that specific scenario, we had the option of running a class of 4 students. So a combined K1 would have had 4 students total. And multiple people at the school, including the person who was going to teach that class, felt like she couldn't, with good faith, carry out the curriculum she was being asked to carry out. With 4 students, and without getting into the details of each specific student's need, felt that a peer group bigger than 4 was essential for student grouping, for sharing, for some of the developmental skills that are taught at that age group. It seemed clear that more than 4 students were needed. So we were really stuck between, I felt like a rock and a hard place. I also feel like it's a really specific example of a teacher whose exact credentials and experience are really, if anyone's going to be able to pull this off, it happens to be this teacher has a master's in curriculum design and a lot of experience with multi-grade teaching. We're going to pair her with a multi-grade, many-decade experienced early educator who used to teach a K-1-2 at Weybridge. They're going to work together over the summer to look at every single grade level standards and see how they're going to be carried out. We're using some of Ripton's grant funding to supplement intervention into that classroom and then moving a paraprofessional there. So that's an example of kind of wrapping around a tough situation.
Suzanne? So people have asked if there's historical data as far as class sizes and clumpings. We've had presentations, so they should be probably in notes of board meetings over periods of years backwards, at least for 6 years, if not more. When we came together as a district, one article that we chose not to take on was the ability for students to move, meaning, one question for us was, what about school choice for elementary students? And at that point, the committee had way more than what we could have on our plate, so we decided we would just kind of punt that down so that someone further down the line could take on that issue, so that's why they're in the unification, there's nothing on school movement, especially around elementary students. But my other question is, looking at the numbers again, I have always worried about, especially in the younger years, teachers having a lot of high need students in a group. I'll use my son as an example. When he was in elementary school, I think he had a class of 18, probably 10 of them were on IEPs. So that's a lot of students on plans in one class with one teacher. So I'm presuming that conversation was also something that was taken into effect when we did these groupings, so that one teacher wasn't spending the entire year trying to run from one IEP meeting to the next.
Yeah, I think it was the third or fourth slide, the first thing we started with was the students and who are these learners and what are their needs and what are their strengths.
I think it's an important point that you're raising though, Suzanne, because if you have two cohorts that are adjacent to each other, so a second and a third grade or a kindergarten and a first grade, and both of those cohorts are small, and you happen to have high needs students in each of those cohorts, you have to add a third cohort, right, in order to get a big enough group so that it feels much more balanced. And now you have 3 years of curriculum, and I just want to make sure that as a board you're aware that despite exhaustive efforts, to do the very best we can, there is no way to ensure that every curricular year is covered under those moving situations. There just is no way to do that. And I think, that's really important for you to understand, especially as we begin to talk more about reaching the targets in your strategic plan, our strategic plan, because if the students do not have access to the curriculum, they can't perform and have success, right? That used to come up in high school, right? If you hadn't reached geometry, you weren't going to do well on the 10th grade math assessment. So there were lots of paths that didn't involve geometry, right? Well, here's the elementary version of that, and in that way, it's different from what Mary Hogan experiences, or right now what Weybridge experiences, because they have a consistent configuration set, because they're able to make class sizes that are consistent for curricular purposes.
Yeah, I see Steve and then Jamie and then Joanna. Steve?
Hi, Dr. Baker, you have said numerous times that there is no way to fix XYZ, and that this is going to continue. And I sit here trying to hold my tongue, but I don't see how. And by the way, Ripton is losing. I believe their 5th grade has 11 students in it. So that population will continue to drop. But we refuse to talk about the idea of consolidation. And that we're still not looking at grouping these students together in a way that makes sense educationally. I'm not even talking fiscally anymore. This seems like this is creating huge problems for the rural schools in all the ways that Courtney outlined. Multiple years with the same teacher, peer groups, they're restricted. And I sit here and go, if the students in Ripton were combined with the students in Salisbury, not even moved to Mary Hogan, that would seem to solve most of the grouping questions in both schools. To try to say that, well, yeah, there's serious problems at Mary Hogan because you have this one group of 3 that keeps the meetings and moves. If 2 teachers were taken from the rural schools and added to give Mary Hogan their 4 teachers in each cohort, that problem would go away. And when I look at the 3rd grade, or when I look at the 3 classes in 2 grade levels at Mary Hogan that have 18 students, not just 18 students, but 3 sections of approximately 18 students. And then I look, at the panoply of all the other small rural schools that have classes the sizes of 6 and 10, and I understand the frustration and the furious questions that I get from Middlebury parents about why are our classes so large when I hear about the tiny classes at some of the rural schools. If we're going to do data-driven decisions, why are we not talking about the consolidation of the rural schools, especially the ones that have the smallest populations? In terms of the financial question I have, I've heard multiple times that resources are being distributed, again, to the smaller elementary schools. And the question comes to me, are those being accounted for in those schools' budgets, or are those coming out of central office funds? And are we again hiding the further expenses of having these small rural schools? I can't believe that we're not having that conversation. We're not even addressing that conversation. So I know it sounds like I'm saying the same thing I've always said, but I'm going to continue to say it because it seems like the problem is getting worse, not better. So that's all I have to say.
You know, it's an interesting point you make, Steve, and I think what I need is guidance that will help in a number of ways. For example, you could in policy suggest that what needs to happen is that attendance areas need to be redrawn such that students are in a learning environment so that the population is consistent. That's one thing you could put into policy guidance. Another thing you could put into policy guidance is that if there are parents who feel that a peer group is too small, that becomes a condition for C30, right? Which is, a policy that allows me to offer another option to that family to be somewhere else. Knowing that if I do that, then typically those students don't come back. So that might mean that, the school that's impacted actually loses grades and then is obviously harder to maintain for all the reasons it was wonderful in the first place. So there are, and we could think of others, right? There are probably lots of different types of guidance. What I need from you, preferably before next March, is that I have a clear sense as to how I can best be of service, to the students and families and communities in working through this. It would be great to have that guidance so that we can provide the right relief when we know that circumstances exist that are getting in the way of providing equitable access to everybody for success. Which we have agreement really among teachers. I haven't found anybody that doesn't agree with the things that Courtney put up there as pieces. Really, for the most part. So I think that's an important ask.
Jamie, and then Joanna. Yeah, I think Jamie had his up first, and then Joanna. The way I saw it, anyway.
Okay, no, that's fine, whatever. My question, you sort of answered my question, Wendy, and I was basically gonna ask you, the policy is short. It's like 3-4 paragraphs. The procedure is a little bit more, I guess, I'm sure we'll get into this in the future, but what can you not do now with the policy or through the policy that you would like to do next March? Because the stuff about, what did you just say? All the different things that the policy triggers, conversation-wise, I'm not sure. Are you thinking those end up in the policy? Because that doesn't seem. You are suggesting that.
Well, I don't think it's within the superintendent's purview, as I understand it,
Right.
to really redraw attendance boundaries, which
Sure.
are laid out in C30. So
Yeah,
that's a
right.
policy decision.
Right.
If you want to do that, or allow me to redo that, for example, if East Middlebury is now assigned to Ripton Elementary School, well, that solves Ripton's, configuration challenge, right?
Yeah.
But that's not within my decision-making
Understood.
area. Also, if it is, it's not really the intent of what's written in C30 for me to say, if your peer group is too small, we'll go ahead and move you, knowing that if I do that with the three new kindergartners that are coming in, to Weybridge next year, then there goes that grade, probably the next one, and then really that's depleting a school of its students,
Sure.
really without addressing the issues face on. And so those are examples of, just some examples of ways that I could provide relief, but I need policy guidance to be able to implement that. I don't think you want me just deciding those things, on my own.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just was just thinking how unfortunate it is that we're still functioning as an SU in so many ways after being consolidated for almost a decade. Even the policy itself references SU so many times in a way, and it's November 2022, so it's not like it's out of date. It's just antiquated in a lot of ways. There's a significant tension for me when I hear all of the foundational things to create stability in an educational environment, and yet the changes that are being made are creating an even more volatile system and situation for all of the kids. I'm thinking about Ripton, and it's really difficult to say, like, oh, if 2 more kids were to come, like 2 kids would alleviate the significant disruption that this is going to cause for years to come. So what's going to happen next year? What's going to happen the year after? Like, this is a big deal for 2 kids, and yet I'm hearing from so many people that they want to send their kid to Ripton, but they live in Middlebury. So that is a significant tension for me, and I wonder, are Middlebury families asking, in that pre-K, K process that Meg Baker, too bad Meg is leaving, but are there conversations that are happening with those kindergarten families to say, are there options? I've heard district employees refer to our schools as different avenues for learning, different ways to access learning for kids that need it. And so all those things combined, sit not well with me in terms of this. And I do think it needs a policy change, but just a question, like, how do you answer families that ask to go to a different school?
So that's C30.
Yeah, the flip side of this is C30.
And we, one change that we made this year that I understand hadn't been done before is we through Meg reached out to the pre-K, the 4-year-old population coming into kindergarten, to make sure that there was broad awareness of C30, realizing that sometimes when you're a parent of a 4-year-old, you haven't really thought of yourself as part of the system yet and the policies that might apply to you in that way, especially if you've been attending a community preschool as opposed to one that's in schools. So we deliberately did that to make sure that any requests that are outlined, and the conditions for that are pretty clear in C30, were surfaced. That did not surface any other families who wish to go somewhere other than their attendance area. So we did take that extra step just to make sure that everybody had access to that policy. And what you're bringing up, Joanna, is another relief option, right? Which is we could open up tuition options, an intra-district, not tuition, but we used to think of it that way, right? So choice, intra-district choice. That's a policy option that can be done. For example, if we're finding that there's a school that's in this circumstance, we could solicit, we could let people know, hey, there are some openings here. Would anybody be interested in coming to this learning environment? C30 right now does not really provide that option. That would be quite a stretch, I think, to implement it that way. But that's policy guidance that could be developed. And we're happy to go down any of those paths that feel right for the community now. But we need some additional policy guidance to know what to do.
And just,
I have a feeling you're gonna.
I speak to this only because the historical thing has been brought up a couple times. Like historically, when there was low kindergarten numbers, that's when the pre-K program started. And in Ripton, I'm looking at the sandbox and there's a full class sitting in the sandbox that would have been able to attend Ripton 3 years ago, but can't. So they're like, so it's pre-K and involving like that conversation. I know it's not the same agency that governs it, but I need to put that out there because there are families that are really desperate for pre-K options and it's only available in a limited capacity with the district.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I think we are very beholden to geography in a way, so, you know, and when we think we're thinking outside the box, we're talking about school consolidation, but there are districts, the ones that I know of tend to be more suburban or much more urban than ours, but there are definitely districts in the country that, they have school choice, but it doesn't mean that I just get to decide where my kid goes. There's a network of schools, there's a union or a district of schools, and parents visit and they list their top 3 choices, and then I would presume central office and those schools kind of take that information and they figure out, you know, who is best served where, including that school community. You know, there are a lot of ways we can think about creating stability around this issue that I don't think we've explored. So I agree with Steve on that. And it would be kind of exciting to go down some thought processes and really considering different ways of how we take a population of 673 elementary students with a certain number of spaces available in different buildings and different needs and different considerations for staffing, and like try to create some more consistency and predictability, but also just, you know, something good for everyone.
Suzanne?
So the only thing I'll add is after we consolidated and we started on probably the first ever in the state facilities management or plan or whatever it was called at that point in time, no one in the state knew how to put it together, but one thing we were looking at was where do each and every one of the students in this district live? How many times does a bus drive by that student's house versus where that student actually ends up going to school? Could we redraw lines? And also in that conversation was also the piece about school choice, but in this conversation about school choice was then that there would not be busing for those students that chose school choice, which then makes it an equity issue, because if you have parents that work 3 jobs, but they really want their child to go to X school and they can't get them there, they can't ask for school choice. So busing has to be part of that equation, but there was conversations about trying to do, you know, people plans and where they all live, because people talked about, hey, my kid lives here, this bus going to this school drives by, but then my kid's bus shows up and turns around in my driveway or whatever, and it was just seemed kind of crazy, but that was never work that was finished, unfortunately.
Ellie and then Mary Heather.
I think it's very interesting. I have friends in another district that has school choice, and the conversations that happen around going to each school, seeing which one's the best fit. I have a friend with 4 kids and they go to 4 different schools, even though they could all go to one, because she put each one in the school that was the best fit for her kid. And that's just something that, like, here I've never even comprehended the idea of just the way we're set up.
Is transportation offered to them?
She has to drive to a central busing location, then they go to the different schools.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that's one of the things I'm thinking of. I mean, certainly from just a stability and at least educational sustainability perspective, it seems like we ought to be considering like attendance area lines, and because it seems like that could be an easy solution where, you know, we're taking geography into consideration and then solving the transportation problem wouldn't be so challenging. I think if you open it up to school choice and you allow anyone to go anywhere, transportation just becomes an unsolvable riddle, and we obviously don't have a lot of options with transportation, so we're sort of stuck in that realm. But the other thing that I can't help but think about is the fiscal sustainability of this as well. And our current configuration and the way we're spending right now, we're right up against the spending threshold, and that's not likely to get better. Obviously, the demands that we have on our district taxpayers will continue to rise as our tax credit goes down, and I guess I'm sort of wondering about if we were to contemplate redrawing boundaries where we have class size stability and therefore alleviating the need to provide additional professionals to provide that intervention, to make sure that curriculum continuation is happening in a split classroom, or it seems like in addition to having a teaching professional for a class of 12 or 14 that may have 2 to 3 grades, and then you're also sending in additional wraparound professionals, your cost per pupil is skyrocketing. And I think we need to contemplate the fiscal sustainability of that in addition to the educational equity sustainability aspects, and look at maybe we do need to contemplate redrawing our boundaries so we're not just where it is geographically driven but not driven by town boundary, and so that we can problem solve in a way that still meets the needs of our local families, but not so married to town identity. And I'm just wondering if that's a solution that is possible.
I think there are just 2 things I might loft out for consideration as this moves ahead around that. One is, right now, the only place where the students in Addison Central really all come together is middle school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a bumpy cohesion. So, one thing that might be helpful is to think about ways that students in Addison Central could also maybe join forces before they get there. I think that begins to be a conversation. I think that is more and more important when you're talking about bringing together just diverse experiences and helping kids to work with each other in that respect. So the other thing is that whenever I think some of the nice work that Matt has led around trying to get student services sort of all in one bucket really shows that this district is spending a fair amount on recovery, if you will, on supports for students who are not necessarily able to get everything they need through the universal instruction. And I think Courtney and I would be in agreement that if the universal instruction is strong and good, you have fewer expenditures in those secondary supports. So, I mean, obviously I know the least about that budget given my, I just got here and then anybody does, but I would be very surprised if by strengthening your tier 1 instruction, you did not end up, with some savings. The last thing I would want to suggest to you is the way I look at this is right now, I think we have 43 K-5 classrooms in which reading and math are taught, right? Kind of, your traditional classrooms. I'm not adding in the arts, Spanish and movement for now into this conversation. So the way I look at it is how many of those classrooms do we need and how can we make them strong? All equitably strong. And it doesn't matter where we put them, that's because I do look at this as a district, and that we have the same responsibility to each student here. So, so that's the way I'm thinking about it, which may or may not be how that's gone before, but hopefully that's helpful.
Jamie?
Let me just say that I appreciate this conversation we're having a lot. I think it's really interesting. And for some of the reasons Mary Heather said and others. I was just talking with someone just 2 days, there's 2 families actually who live right on the Middlebury Waybridge line, like literally like 12 feet from it. And they're just like, well, why, but then they have, one is a 4-year-old, 2 4-year-olds. And it's like, well, everyone's like, well, why, if there's, why can't we do that? Send them to Waybridge, in other words, even though they're on this side of the Middlebury line. And it just seems like this thing, I've thought about it a couple times over the years. And what I appreciate about the conversation we're having now is that sort of what you just said, when it's based on creating quality classrooms as a primary objective, and B, it's not, in some ways, it might not be moving mountains. To Joanna's point about a few students here and there, makes actually a pretty big, lasting difference. To Courtney's point about how a school can replicate those grade assignments. And it's really interesting.
Yeah, kind of bringing this back,
Sure.
okay, a little bit. Listening to the excellent dialogue that we're having here, I'm thinking there's a couple options for us, right? We could, because there's policy work to be done, right? We could basically charge the policy committee to start to look at some of these changes, right, that we've kicked around and more. Or we could form an ad hoc committee that's made up of policy and others as well, to do something like that as well, But I think clearly we need to have a focus on it, and not just at the board meeting, right? Where a group of folks really go away and start thinking creatively and turning over rocks and seeing what's there. Some ideas will turn out to be great ideas, other ideas will turn out, that didn't work, kind of thing. It's okay. So what is your thought on this? I mean, this is, I think really important work, and I think the timing is of essence. If we really want to have something in place, to help shape next year, the following year, and thereafter.
Yeah.
Okay, so I needed to keep track of hands. I think Tricia, then I think Ellie, and then Mary Heather. Joanna, did you have your?
No, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Can I just make a quick point? I think the policy committee is poised to talk about this at a special meeting that we're having. No.
Tomorrow, we're not talking tomorrow.
Oh.
We are talking, it's likely that C30, is that the one?
Yes.
Is out of date, and we're gonna take that up soon.
Yep.
This one is not out of date, and it was not on my radar until recently.
Right.
So
The
we,
D6.
D6.
Right.
So it seems to make sense to talk them together, so I'm sure that will at some point be on our agenda.
Okay, right.
I was just curious, I mean, I feel I would love to be part of this ongoing discussion and ideation. I can't help but feel like a majority of the board would feel that way, which turns it into a full board meeting
Right.
anyway. So is there any reason why we couldn't just have a working meeting as opposed to ad hoc committee or this or that? Or do you really want to try and keep this group under the majority?
No, hey, it's the work of the board is the work of the board, right?
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned. So I'm trying to think if ultimately it needs to come back to the full board discussion, right? And does it make sense to have a group of folks really start coming up with ideas to help frame that discussion at the board level?
Isn't that what the policy committee is supposed to do? To dive into our current policies and figure out if they serve us well and bring proposals?
Sure.
Mary Heather, and then I'll go.
Yeah, well, and Ellie was first.
Ellie was before.
Yeah, mine's kind of on this line anyway. I feel like this is the kind of conversations that got me interested in being a part of this board and would definitely want to be a part of. And I kind of worry about any kind of distilled down options type discussion that would come out of a policy then meeting coming to the big board. If I wasn't, it would, I guess what I'm saying is I would prefer to have this be a discussion with all of us because it's such an important topic and I don't think we should break it up.
And to your question, Ellen, you know, what I'm trying to look at is kind of the dynamic of the board and figuring out how we can move forward so that people feel comfortable and buy into the solution as well. And so I'm not trying to drive anyone's solution. I'm just really trying to figure out dynamically, you know, what's going to really help us get there. And I have no problem having, you know, the policy committee take the first, you know, step at it. And people can come and give feedback to the policy committee, all that kind of thing. I just threw out the other as well because I know that there's a lot of people that are interested in this topic. And so I'll get back to you. Yep, so now I lost track. I think it was Mary Heather and then Suzanne, I think you were.
I think, I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me is that a lot of what we're talking about here was exactly the charge of what eventually became the facilities committee. And a lot of that work was conducted with the leadership team to look at, you know, what the possibilities are, what, you know, what's kind of best practice in terms of class configuration and all of that. And so it seems to me a little bit like the facilities committee's work just kind of came to a halt when we were, when COVID happened. And right prior to then, there was, you know, kind of a report to talk about all of the work that had been done. And yes, a lot of that was kind of based on building assessments. But a significant portion of that work also involved the leadership team in looking at, you know, what are kind of the board's wishes for creating good quality learning environments that are equitable across the district. And so I guess I wonder about that, because that committee's work has basically now just been kind of overseeing the work that Bruce and his department have been doing, and that wasn't the original intent of that committee. So I guess I just want to add that to the conversation. In terms of, like, you know, involving folks, perhaps both committees could be, you know, taking a look at it from their different perspectives. Policy can look at it from policy perspective. Facilities committee can re-engage the historic work that had been done, specifically looking at the educational component as well in terms of building configurations. And maybe, you know, maybe both can provide those different perspectives. I don't know. I just don't want to forget all of the historic work that was done by that committee. And I think it's relevant to bring some of those findings forward as well. So
Go for it.
What you're saying actually reminded me of something that I think has now become even more relevant, which is in that original facilities master plan in the standard school, or I forgot exactly what the example was called, you didn't have multi-age grouping. So in this, now there's a lot to be gained from multi-age grouping, you know, through research. So there's this, if you were to go down this path in terms of thinking about the learning environments first, you could determine on a policy level whether or not you are going to have multi-age grouping, right? And because once you've got, I love the idea of looking at your classrooms, high quality classrooms. What is the experience? Because then the facilities questions will take care of themselves. You know, like some of these other things will become apparent, you know, rather than starting with the buildings and determining how best to fit people into the buildings, which is an oversimplification maybe of you know how you might have begun in the past, but it does allow you to revisit those things and put them in policy in terms of what you are, what is the policy guidance around these kinds of things, which might be helpful.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going to go. I think the piece that's been missing is now stepping back and determining what is the policy, right? We haven't really articulated policy. And so that's really important to do.
Suzanne was next in line.
Okay, Suzanne.
So to Dr. Baker's comment, when the board met in a retreat, they didn't think about class sizes or anything. They were talking about what was the environment that would be best for all students to learn in, and that's where we started our conversation. Since this board is so new, I would hesitate to send anybody off until they had a basis for all the work that has been done. And so I would think that would mean like a walk through memory lane maybe of the conversations and the work that's been done. Because when the facilities master plan started, we were thinking facilities, and then out of that came the community engagement group because it branched and split. So I would strongly suggest that we have either a full board meeting or we take a morning and have a facilitated conversation around what has happened and what has occurred, so we know the work that's been gathered. So then that can be used to hand off to policy, hand back to facilities. But we shouldn't lose all of that work that has been gathered and collected and worked on, because you really, without that, you're gonna have to start from square one, and that was a lot of years of work and a lot of meetings.
Okay.
Ellen.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there are a lot of people, we need to think outside the box on the process by which we engage with this as a board. So we were to just go back to our committee silos, a lot of people would be left out of crucial amounts of information and brainstorming and like doing some of that work. And if we try to do this as a full board, we'd never do it. Because the amount of, even just to go down rabbit holes, right? It would like to really like explore some interesting options and then hit the wall and come back again. We can't do that as a full board. So I don't know if we resolve this tonight, but I think it would be interesting to think about like a quarterly meeting that's just about the board brainstorming, you know, edifying ourselves about what has been done in the past, what's updated now, and then through that kind of determining the handfuls of people who would volunteer in partnerships or policy, or committees that might be most appropriate to take pieces of that work for everyone to understand what it looks like, and then to report back and say, like, this is what we learned, not what we've decided, you know, what, you know, and, but I think this is a huge conversation that demands a huge process.
Right.
And there's a way of designing that so that there's a lot of shared leadership and also shared learning without necessarily overburdening this whole group of people or any one committee. So I get that we won't figure this out tonight. I just think it's definitely something we can figure out without turning a whole.
Yeah, and that was kind of where my mindset was. It's like, how can we do something like that? So I really appreciate that. And so, you know, we're going to be off for the month of July. And so why don't folks, while you're on the beach or whatever, give us some thought, you know, give it how this could be structured, and then when we come back, you know, we can start the ball rolling.
Hopefully I'm not thinking about this on the beach.
Just teasing. But so then when August comes, we can then come back to this. And I think this has been really good discussion. And I think we have to do something, right? And so our goal should really be is to come up with the right structure, as Ellen put it so eloquently, you know, to come up with a process that's going to be more in-depth than just committee work necessarily, so that folks really feel they have had input and are brought along from a knowledge perspective of what has happened. You know, things that maybe were thought of previously. There may be reasons why that works or why it doesn't work. You know, being able to look at all of it in a just really open, collaborative way. Jamie.
I know this is going long. I guess one thing the policy committee could do is just to look at policies that are about this topic.
Sure.
You know, we could just read them and bring the board or whatever and be like, here's what they do here, here's what they do here.
Yep.
And that's like something that would expand people's, you know, whatever you call it, knowledge about this topic. And could then, you know, people could weigh in, engage. It's, you know, some little way to start maybe.
Yeah, that would be great. You know, I don't think, you know, I would have no problem with that. I don't think anyone here would have a problem with the policy committee starting to really take a look at that. I think that would be awesome.
I just really want to thank Courtney for her work.
Yes.
This has been a big part of what she's done. And that's a lot of information to put together in one place. And I also want to make sure you understand how wonderful a command the principals and the teachers have on the students and where things are and a deep, deep desire to get things right, which meant some fits and starts, you know, right? Because some of these are conversations that they haven't really had as publicly before. And so it's been really wonderful for me to watch this unfold as part of, you know, my first couple of months here. You know, and it's been a wonderful example of good, strong collaboration in terms of what might be best. Yeah. And thanks for such a wonderful discussion.
Thank you. Okay, so I know we're a little bit behind here. I think the rest of the agenda we can go through fairly quickly. Report of the chair. I wanted to mention last month, or the last board meeting we had, we talked about a mandate in S55 that we needed to publish on our website, the procedure for submitting notice of an open meeting law violation. Well, if you go under board meetings, it's there. Emily posted the language that we agreed to use, and that's there. So I wanted to just follow up on that. Last time we did talk about the AOE rule prioritization and selection, and we wanted to see, you know, what transpired with the VSBA rubric discussion that's going on before we make final selections. And Suzanne, if you could spend just a little bit giving folks an update on the last that's happened there.
So the VSBA board met and spent about 3 hours on the draft rubrics, which are not for public distribution at this point in time. But a lot of the work that came out was that the rubrics needed to be a little bit, well, they needed to be clearer in some cases. Other cases, they had to be much more explicit. But large pieces that came out was, as we were talking about these rubrics and the requirements, it's not just the AOE that's going to be assisting boards in making sure that they can reach these standards. So if standards are around budget building, we would be talking with finance people that would then help us. When the rubrics are around facilities, those questions and those concerns would go to the facilities people within the State Department. So there's a lot of other people other than just straight Agency of Ed that are going to be helping out. I can tell you that the rubrics currently are set up as a 1 through 4 system. That probably sounds familiar. 1 being not yet proficient and 4 being advanced. And typically when any of the rubrics we looked at that were not yet proficient was basically you weren't really doing anything on the standards. But when you moved to column 2, there were some things you were doing. To be proficient, you were doing everything in column 2 plus column 3. And then to be advanced, you were doing 2, 3, and 4. So you were like the rock stars. They did talk about the board's assessments, like what we just did, where we assessed how we thought we were doing on the standards. And those will have to be published on the websites. And so the word of warning from the AOE was just remember when you do your self-reflection on your board work, to be honest, because since they're going to be published, your community members can go on there and read them and say, well, wait a minute, you guys say you're doing a really great job here, but we may not necessarily feel the same way. So all of this work is going to be as transparent as possible, and the The rubrics went back to the original standards committee, and they were charged with taking all of the 3 hours worth of comments and critiques and fixing the rubrics, and hopefully in August we'll get them back.
Thank you, Suzanne. So with that said, I know that was a critical item that folks brought forward last meeting that we really wanted to kind of understand better. We talked about this in the executive committee on last Monday as well, and the thought we had is, well, for now, possibly we focus on that first one that we prioritize very highly, which was the board ensures its annual budget aligned with its stated priorities and provides an equitable distribution of resources to help meet the needs and goals of every student. So that right now we kind of commit to focus on that, though we need the rubric to know what that entails as well. And then once the rubric comes out, we could then possibly pick up the other ones as well. Does that seem reasonable? Then from a work plan perspective, we would incorporate that one in there for now. A lot to be decided, what that really means, and hopefully the rubric will help us. Does that seem reasonable to folks to take that approach at this point? Awesome. The next thing I have is superintendent goal setting and evaluation process. And I mentioned last meeting that I had spent some time with Judy. And Judy also spent some time talking with Dr. Baker. And she came up with a proposal that is included within your board pack materials about really having training around superintendent evaluations and what that really means and entails, so that we're all really on the same page. This would be above and beyond the actual goal setting that she would work with us and would be done in the same session. So within the materials, there is a proposal for this. She's going to already be here because she's meeting with the Hannaford Career Center on in between the 17th and the 24th. And so she's proposing that one of those particular days, which is a Saturday, that the board would come back together and we would actually do this process. And the incremental cost to us would be $3,000. Did folks have a chance to take a look at the proposal, and what are your thoughts? Jason?
The contract is not with the same entity that did our superintendent search.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. It is. I'm sorry, say that again, Jason.
She does have a different email address, doesn't she?
No, it's not the same. It's
Well,
not
this
INJ. So,
Organized Leadership Solutions, I think, is her organization.
okay, so I just want to make that clear. That
Yeah.
So this is outside the
Right,
INJ contract.
Right. And she's doing her own consulting work. The part of the goal setting is really covered as phase 5 of the superintendent search, though.
Gotcha.
So basically, we would come together on another Saturday in August on either the 17th or the 24th. Or if those dates didn't work, then we would then fly you in to do a different date, which would then be in addition to the 3,000. Thoughts?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is this not covered in the cost of what we paid Mac and Jake to hire superintendent?
What we covered in Mac and Jake was for her to come and do goal setting with us with the new superintendent. It wasn't to do, but it didn't include travel and living. And what it didn't include was to do actual training to really center us as to what that is, right?
Did we get that yet?
We will get that as part of this. It'll be an add-on on top of this. So this is the incremental cost above and beyond, what we're already getting if we actually turned it into a training session as well. This is very similar to what she did with the Career Center. And think Steve was has his hand up, so I'm gonna let him, I see your hand, Steve, so why don't you share?
Yeah, so I wanted to let you know that tentatively the Career Center has engaged Judy in that timeframe. And one of the selling points was if we can split the travel costs, that would actually benefit us both. So
Oh, okay,
we might want to coordinate with the Career Center, like you said, dates within this. Yeah, if we get her here on the same dime, that defrays the cost for both of us. So we may want to talk a little more in a coordinated way with the Career Center.
and do you have assuming we want to do this, do you have a suggestion how we could do that coordination?
Yeah, they have already set the date for their retreat, but I'm sure that if it works out better to do a different day, that we could probably change that because this is an August.
Okay, got it.
So it would be, I think it would be worthwhile if we're splitting the travel costs. It would be worthwhile for us to move, a day to or a different weekend or whatever it is, so that both districts can engage for services at a lower cost. So I think they're open to flexibility on that, although they have already set their retreat, like we have already set our retreat. I think that it would be in both of our interests to coordinate that well enough so that we don't have to pay for 2 trips.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Other thoughts? Jason?
Currently, the policy says that the executive committee does the evaluation of the superintendent, not the full board. So this is like training in theory of what the full board would require, but it would require a policy change for the full board to take on the evaluation of the superintendent.
Well, the whole board is responsible for the superintendent's performance. If I understand, and Suzanne can help me out here, if I understand the current policy, it was really that the executive committee really takes the lead on it to ensure that it happens and starts gathering that kind of thing. But everyone on the board is responsible for the superintendent's evaluation.
No, that's true, and on top of that, after the board has discussed the superintendent's evaluation, the executive committee then takes everyone's comments and takes them to the superintendent and says, this is what the board has to say about your performance, and this is where the board feels that you should be as far as a pay raise, because the board has to set that, it can't be the executive committee. So they just are the last funnel, because the last time the board discusses the superintendent evaluation, the superintendent would come and present all of their information for a final time, and then they leave. So they don't hear any of that conversation that's done in executive session. And then the executive committee is tasked with taking all that and
The policy is explicit though. It says that the executive committee conducts the review of the superintendent and shares it with the board.
Well, and maybe there needs to be a wording change on that.
That's not how it's been done.
It's not how it's been done at all, right?
The executive committee delivers the board's review to the superintendent and then follows up and sort of shares what the discussion with the superintendent is like, but
Yeah.
it's not ever.
The intent is not for the executive committee to be responsible for this. It's responsible to ensure that it happens, potentially, but not that it's the executive committee that's doing the evaluation. And I, my personal thought is having us all, because we're all pretty new to this, other than a couple of us, right? Is having training on, these are really the important things to consider and talking about it, with Judy, Dr. Baker, whatever, at this meeting would be a really good thing. And, we may want to tweak the language of the policy to make it more clear as to what it is, right? It's words on a paper, and we have a policy committee that can help us draft
Let's just redraft every policy.
No,
On the beach.
But it's clearly not the intent for I don't want that responsibility, that's for sure, as on the executive committee. Mary Heather.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I don't think the policy as it stands prevents us from moving forward with the training and conducting this as a full group. And I would advocate for training just because, this is the first time that we're really making an effort to, but I don't want to say the first time, I think this is an opportunity for us to really codify a secure process that's transparent and involves lots of folks who are supervised by the superintendent. And I think it would be best for the district to have that, those sort of artifacts preserved by having a training that has materials that we, keep and put into the public record and it's there for future reference.
So, Bob, are you looking for a recommendation to move forward with this and date, or?
Yeah, so what I would love to do, and this is what I mentioned, my amendment to the agenda, to take action that would enable me to sign this contract to start it. And I really do appreciate Steve's comment, coordinating this, with the Career Center to make sure it's happening when we both can really take advantage of it. I guess the question I have right now is if we did this on the 17th or the 24th, would folks be able to attend it? Or are those non-negotiable, you can't do it. So then we need to start looking for another date.
Do you want to just do
a
a
quick
Yeah, so how many could handle or could schedule something on the 17th?
Zoom is fine.
No.
I mean, can I?
I would do it in the morning, honestly.
And we could try doing it morning and start early. Suzanne had a good suggestion that, no starting at 9:30, let's start at 8 or, whatever, so that people have their day available. I guess how many couldn't do it on the 17th? That's probably easier.
Could not.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Okay, how about the 24th? How many could not? And Steve, if you cannot, raise your hand. Who could not do it on the 24th?
Just to verify, the first day of school is August 26th, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is the weekend before school starts. I'll be out. Is
That's a rough weekend in some
it,
households.
If we know it's gonna be in the morning? Because
Probably.
I can do the morning, I can't do anything.
I can make sure that we structure it so it's done in the morning.
It's a summer weekend day.
It's hard.
Does it say how long? Because she said the other thing takes 2 to 3 hours, so if it's combining
Well,
with that,
she-
this might be a whole day thing.
Yes, so let me read this again.
Do we know what date the,
My guess, it would probably be 5 hours or something like that.
Can I make a
Yep.
suggestion?
Yes, you may.
Perhaps, maybe we just move forward with taking action on the contract and whether or not we're supportive of moving forward with that and do a Google
And
poll or something
to see if we can get a date.
to nail down the date.
Also, is it something that could be recorded so that if we can't
Yeah.
attend, like if I can't attend on the
Sure.
17th, but that's when the critical mass of people can
Sure.
go, I can catch up on it and
Yeah,
the same,
yeah, that's a
but-
great idea.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Okay, so then if we, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna just make a
Make a
motion.
motion.
That would be great. Thank you.
I will make a motion to authorize the board chair Barb Wilson to enter into contract with consultant Jimmy Sclair Stein to provide training to the board for establishing superintendent goals and conducting a superintendent evaluation.
second?
Excellent. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions?
Oh, did Steve want to say something, or was he?
No, that was an aye, I think, right, Steve?
Yeah, no, that was just an aye.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, great. So I will do that and I will try to iron out the dates and I'll send out a Google a doodle poll or whatever, you know, to figure out what would be better dates and work with Hannaford Career Center as well, so we can get this ironed out. Because I want it to happen, if we don't do it in August, early September, because then we get into budget and we need to set up the goals and objectives soon. So thank you so much. So work plan, I just included in your package the latest version of the work plan. It's a work in progress, what we have at this point in time so that you have it. If you have any comments, feedback, whatever, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email. Okay? Then a report of the board, Jamie.
Sorry, I was eating M&M's. That's
Sorry.
Dinner, called dinner over here. So I just made some changes to the A20 policy, which is about how the board and the executive committee and the superintendent create the agenda and execute meetings. I added in, I think it was Ella's point about making sure we announce Robert's Rules of Order. All this stuff I added is in yellow. I added the stuff that I think it was Joanna reminded me about the 3 board members can place an item on the agenda. And then I included this bit at the end about how minutes will be recorded, which someone wanted. And then the bold paragraph right above the yellow will stay. I don't know why it's bold. So this was just reflecting on what our discussion was last time, I think.
Excellent. Any feedback? So I guess, is this in the version now that we can use this version to do the actual warning, right? So 10 days before the vote, I think it's 10 days, right?
10 days.
Yeah, before the vote. So this could be the version.
Cleaned up.
Cleaned up?
Yeah, I can clean it up and send a fresh copy to whoever.
Okay.
Yeah.
To Darcy,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Yep.
And so then we'll start the official clock.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Negotiations, Steve, any updates for us?
Negotiations is meeting Wednesday and then again on July 1st. The only outstanding issue is the inclusion of the group that organized and how to include them in the support staff contract. That is dragging on longer than we thought it would, but it is the only outstanding issue. We really are trying to get this wrapped up, but it's proving more difficult than we thought it would be, but that's as much as I can give you right now.
Okay, thank you. Tricia, communications and engagement.
So, Communications and Engagement Committee are continuing to work on a overall procedure for board communications, internal, external, during meetings, et cetera, et cetera. It's too big of a job to bring you anything by this meeting as far as doing it all. However, we did want to pull out the section on the procedure directly addressing policy 821, just so that we can get further along the road so we can start off next year's work on the right foot. So procedure for policy 821, you all have it. The big things that as a committee we wanted to include in here is that we're keeping the 3-minute time limit for each speaker, that hard copy or electronically displayed agenda will be included with each meeting. 2 public comment periods will be offered, one at the beginning and one at the end. However, the topics of those periods will not be limited. So keeping the before and the after comment periods, however, it's not agenda items, it's say what you need to say. And including somewhere probably at the end of the meeting, a board meeting agenda will also include an opportunity for board reflection at the end of the meeting. during which time board members may briefly discuss and consider issues raised and or comments shared during the public comment periods. So it's not a time for dialogue with the public, but a time for the board to reflect and have some sort of interaction with what has been given to us by the public. And then that can be, public comment matters can be scheduled for a future board meeting.
Thank you for the work that's been done here.
Yes, so I think for this isn't an action item, but just,
Could we say like a teeny bit more about what we said about that last line?
yes, please do.
Ellie,
who is also part of the Communications and Engagement Committee.
So that last line where we said, the idea was to create a space in subsequent board meetings where we might discuss in more depth things that were brought up by the public in the previous board meetings, if they were relevant to our roles as board members.
Okay, great.
I just have a question as to why you're not differentiating between the before and after.
Yeah,
And what are the reasons for that?
yeah, and I'll tell you that was something.
Other than having one
Yeah.
public comment?
So, the big thing for me, and there was a lot of conversation back and forth within the committee trying to decide what the best path forward would be. My kind of aha moment was with the view towards our students who are part of our constituency, right? And having a student come to a meeting and expecting them to wait until 9:30, the very end of our meetings to be able to say their piece and give their feedback isn't fair or just for them, right? And so that's a very specific example, right? But I feel like we have had students come throughout this past year to address the board and give us their feedback. And we have, I believe that they have already been agenda items. But I want to make sure that we are open and receptive to that feedback. And yes, Mary Heather.
Yeah, and totally, I mean, we discussed this a lot, and I think the main thing that was driving the conversation was removing barriers. And we considered making some folks wait to the end. It could be a potential barrier, particularly if a stakeholder is a child and their issue is not on the agenda. So that was something that we contemplated as a committee. And really, I think the main thing then, just to get to the second part of your question, is whether to have 2 periods or 1 period, because we could potentially go back to the way it was done prior to this recent change and just have 1 period. And, I think that's up for board debate, frankly. I can see the pros and cons of both. I mean, certainly pros is to catch people who might have come in late or may have a comment that has been sparked by board's conversation,
Right.
which is relevant to the board doing its work. So, so that's kind of why the 2 remain, even though the topics aren't being restricted. I hope that answers your question.
No, it answers my question. I have a different opinion on board meetings, and I will stand by that.
Yeah.
But I think that, having it open-ended too much, days like this when no one was here, it's not an issue. On days when there's something. I didn't mean that. I meant a crowd of people that are here. You come to all the meetings, I congratulate you. But I just feel that you can't get into the trap of having all of this. People can call us anytime they want. They can call every one of us. They can do whatever they can to address the board and however way they want to express it. Now, the fact that it's in a public meeting is convenient, obviously, but it's also public rather than dealing with it. So I understand those balances, but I just don't want all we keep doing is expanding the amount of work we have to do to meeting on Saturdays in the summer, okay? No, I'm not kidding. And that's, I just don't want us to get bogged down in trying to be so open when in fact, we still have to make the decisions. And that's not to say we shouldn't hear from people, but still.
Well, you have not.
You're new to the discussion.
Thank you.
I would say that in the policy, or not policy, sorry, in the communications and engagement meetings that we have had, we are very, very considerate of what kind of suggestions we make and whether they're sustainable and whether they require a tremendous amount of effort on the board's behalf. Because we want to, and I think I can speak on behalf of the whole committee, we want to facilitate community engagement and communication with our stakeholder groups without overburdening the board. So we're trying to work within kind of those constraints that we already have without overburdening anybody else. So I think, I want to assure you, Chip, that this is absolutely something that we
I'm
are
just
talking
stating an
about.
opinion. I mean,
Yeah, sure.
that's why I asked why the differentiation.
Yeah.
I accept that.
Oh, I would just say, I think the meetings where we've had lots of people, members of the public come, it wouldn't matter if it was at the beginning or the end, we were gonna hear from lots of members of the public, because there was an issue or there was a discussion that they really wanted to have, and so it feels like this, opening this up isn't gonna mean a flood of people who wouldn't be coming for their own purposes on different topics anyway. And actually, the converse of that is that it means that maybe we were doing it the way we were doing it to dissuade members of the public from speaking, which I don't think is a good look for us either. If this were about having like whole board meetings just for listening sessions, I think I'd be with you, Chip, where it's just like, oh wow, we're talking about additional meetings, but I just don't think this changes anything other than making it easier for some people to come and say their piece and be able to go home if that's what they want.
It doesn't change the allotted time on the agenda.
And I would speak to the, like the discussions we had in our policy meeting, in our committee meeting about this, like we thought about the 3-minute time limit and originally we were saying, oh, is that a barrier? Should we get rid of that? And then we're thinking about the considerations of, no, it shouldn't just be a 10-minute block with no limit. We need to like keep the time limit so that we don't end up, having our time used up in ways that isn't effective and so that everyone has a chance to speak. But that's one example of the things we discussed and talked about while writing this to make sure.
Mary Heather?
The other thing that we talked about was the obvious sort of work that this places on the board chair in terms of enforcing the structure of it. Because we obviously do want to maintain the ability for the board to conduct its work. We want to be very careful that we're not opening it so much that we're talking about items that have not been warned on the agenda and we violate open meeting law. So, this felt like a happy medium to try to kind of undo some of the damage that I think this past year's process has imposed on some folks who have come to provide public comment and have had to wait, including some of our teachers. Do public comment in a structured, predictable way that that honors our commitment to hearing what people have to say.
So what is the next steps on this?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if we don't have a lot of
I really,
teachers, do we?
yeah. So what we had discussed at our last meeting, Mary Heather, you were going to go through the AOE stuff and pull out anything where communications and engagement procedure would be applicable. And
I'm going through
Laura,
the policies to make sure that we look at all the ones that affect communication.
right. And so that's the work that we'll be jumping into starting in our August meeting is the larger collection of communications and engagement board focus. So this, I think, we wanted to bring to you because we were charged, it seemed, at our last meeting to kind of come up with this, how are our board meetings going to be running? How are we going to make sure that we get our work done and balance that, the feedback from our stakeholders? So this is where we're at. If you guys feel like we're way off course, I would love to hear that. And I wanted to kind of give this is the direction that we're headed in. So hopefully, even though this may not be officially passed, so you know that we're gonna get here as soon as we can.
Well, I don't get it. Wouldn't this procedure just be attached to policy 821?
We've been, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. We've been talking a lot in the Communications and Engagement Committee about how we want to draft a policy. Do we want to have a whole bunch of little procedures that go with each policy, or do we want to have a big document that is how we handle communication engagement as a board? And I think as of now, we're leaning towards one big document with a bunch of different sections so that it's all in one place.
Right.
We know where to look. We're going to cover everything when we need to review it or whatever to it. So I think that's where we're landing on that.
Well, is there, I internet down, is there currently a procedure under 821?
No.
No.
Okay.
This
This
is
is
sort of
what
the new
the
document.
CNE
Right.
committee
They don't
has been
have
working
really
on
board
since
procedures.
2021. And, things got kind of stymied by other policy board work that took precedence, so.
Yeah.
That's not to say that this can't be linked in the procedure.
Right.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It just, there are more pieces that go to our communications procedures than just this comment.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Like, for
Yeah.
example, how we handle, getting emails and complaints and
Right.
who responds and how do we do that and what's the expectation and all that,
Yeah.
which is beyond what 821 is about.
Ellie?
I do wonder if there's a way that we could enact this sooner so that when we
I was just
restart
gonna
in
ask,
August,
I was
we
gonna
could,
ask that question.
um,
So,
and I don't know this.
yeah, so, I was gonna ask, would anyone be opposed if the next time we got together to create agenda, that which will be for the August meeting at this point in time, we could try to do this.
I think we can succeed at doing
Well, and
it.
I don't know, because I'm one of the fairly newbies, I don't know how we say, yes, this is the procedure. Does it have to go through the same steps that policies do? Or, my thought was no. So can we just have it
Yeah, I think,
first meeting in August and say, yep.
I think we're on uncharted ground in some sense, because we haven't done procedures. Obviously, policy is a different story. There's a very distinct process.
Yeah.
I think it would be fair to, when there is a procedure that allows the board to weigh in on it.
Yeah.
And do an unofficial kind of vote. It's not necessarily an action, to make sure the majority of the board is feeling comfortable with it. But right now, the agenda can really be set by the executive committee, right?
Yeah.
So I don't we don't necessarily need a procedure to do that. We don't have one today. And I would be happy to try this for our August meeting and see how it works. And the procedure is kind of like formalizing it. So unless I hear, that's not a good idea. So when we get together and to set the agenda, I gotta remember this though. It's gonna be a ways off.
And the
Yeah.
one last thing for
Yes.
communications and engagement update, this was the biggest thing, but looking forward to the meetings in the coming year. And we did decide yes to having our traveling meetings. I'm recalling my last yes. The communications and engagement committee's suggestion would be to have the 30-minute coffee and cookie time before those traveling meetings, where it is the low-key social time as opposed to the structured. So that means 30 minutes before, not every board member would be able or
To make it.
should have to be there
Right.
every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else? What am I
Yeah, I
missing?
mean, I think it was just the committee's idea of how to move forward with some engagement, less formal engagement with our community while we're already in the school, in that community.
Yeah.
And the
Give it a
idea
try.
was to shift the balance to us giving like time and attention to the little school rather than
Yeah.
putting more work on the little schools, expecting them to present to us when we go there.
And I mean, there could still be a presentation. I think
Yes.
Dr. Baker was gonna take that to the leadership team and decide, what they wanted to do around that. But I think, and the big thing is, we need to publicize it
Mhm.
so that people know, that this is gonna be available to them.
Well, and I would like to say, as I think it was voted for the negotiations that we would feed the negotiation crew, right? I think as a board, we should also commit to, yes, we will have coffee and cookies.
Right, or
At
cheese
each
and
sit-
crackers
right,
and
or
fruit or whatever. That's what we were doing at some
something.
of the other ones.
But again,
Yeah.
it's on us and not on the school to provide it. So that would have to be something that's an action item down the road. And I don't know what finance thinks about that.
So the other thing I
Yes.
would say is that at times when we travel to the schools, some of the schools really want to showcase
Yeah.
some of their goods, so I think that would be a conversation, the board could provide cookies and coffee, or,
Yes.
if they really have great bakers and they wanna showcase their bakers,
Sure.
then, we'll eat your cookies.
I don't think anyone on this board would turn down food.
I'm just saying that we
But
don't
yeah.
want to thumb our noses at schools
Yeah.
that have in the past really wanted to showcase their food or their bakers or
Yeah.
whatever, so that, leave it open either way.
Okay, so I'm gonna move us on.
Okay.
Facilities,
Has not met since the last meeting, we're meeting on Thursday evening.
okay, finance. And I put this action on here, so you want me to take it, Chip?
Finance hasn't met, we did not have anything crucial to meet since the last meeting, and there's
Yeah,
actually over the summer.
issue,
Matt
yeah.
And Dr. Becker are gonna be sort of, I don't know what's the word, modeling?
Modeling, a lot of modeling,
Modeling.
a lot of financial modeling.
Go ahead and go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, and so the other thing that I put on here that I mentioned at the agenda, we won't be meeting as a board again until August. And one of the things we do as a board is approve the bills. And Chip pointed out to me, they actually pay the bills before we approve the bills as a board after they've signed off on them. So we just need to make sure that we have a process for July. I'm assuming the finance committee is obviously going to be available to still review those bills, right, and sign off on them. And then
Yeah, we'll just save them up and.
we can present them, but, for the month of July, we're allowing them to really be the approval, just like Dr. Baker is gonna do that with the appointments and the.
But that's honestly no different than what happens if in
Right.
fact we don't take it up at a specific
Yeah.
meeting, or that we have a gap of a greater amount of time and we collect more
Okay.
bills. So it's not really any different. Jason and
Okay.
I will both read them during
Okay,
those two,
so we don't need
those
an
two
action.
timeframes during July, and we'll present 3 sets
Okay.
come the first meeting. So
Okay, so it sounds like we don't need an action here, is that what we're saying? Okay, so we can nix that. Okay, I just wanted to make sure we're covered. CPAC,
So the spring event, due to schedule conflicts and just the craziness of springtime, the CPAC event and the annual meeting has been postponed to the fall. So we have that to look forward to. And that's when the annual report will be completed, and then we can anticipate a presentation to the full board.
excellent, thank you. Middlebury Community Television, I missed the meeting. I couldn't attend it, so I don't have anything to report. The minutes haven't been produced yet. Parks and Recreation.
There's nothing to report, there has not been any meeting. I guess the only thing I would say is that they did a great job stepping up to try to provide cooling stations and open the pool hours for greater community, not just Middlebury, but our greater community for heat relief. So, yeah, kudos
Which
to
is
them.
great.
Good
And,
times 79.
and then,
Good times 79.
Oh, like
79.
61 if you want to sweat it.
what was it?
The pool table 79.
Oh my God.
That's hot. That is pretty hot.
Yeah.
Where are the ice cubes?
Yeah.
If you're swimming a lot, you're gonna sweat.
Next is the Career Center. Tricia and Steve, do you have anything more to share there?
We had our final meeting last week of, similar to this. Officially signed off on the superintendent evaluation and talked about how we actually report that information out. So it's interesting to have these going kind of parallel.
Cool.
Yeah, wrapping things up.
Thank you.
Steve, if there's anything I'm missing.
I think we lost.
Oh, we lost
Yeah.
Steve. Nope.
That thunderstorm started out.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Sorry, I'm kind of trying to move this on. This would really be hard.
Please.
Public public comment on any topic. Is there anyone that would like to make a public comment?
I'm here. Mary Slozar of Waybridge. It was really interesting to listen to the conversation tonight. You guys have talked about a lot of substantive things, which is always very exciting. I wanted to just follow up on a few things. Again, in case any of my input is helpful to anybody's own thought processes. I just wanted to follow up on this idea around the class sizes and the configurations of schools. Joanna mentioned this idea of different lanes, or I've heard them referred to as corridors. And I just want to emphasize that even this year, with everything happening at Mary Hogan, there were decisions to move students to other schools because Mary Hogan was not an appropriate setting for them, and other schools were deemed more appropriate. And I just hope that that lens feeds this discussion. Some school settings are better for some kids based on needs. So equity is not equal. Equity is getting your needs met. So please think about that in that discussion. I also wanted to follow up on your point, Wendy, about universal instruction. I think that's part of the motivation under Act 173. And it's also something that our school district's not really doing. There's coordinated curriculum, which of course Courtney works really hard on, but there's not a lot of UDL happening and not really an effort in that direction. We've gone leaps and bounds with literacy, but not SEL, not math, not our general curriculum. So I just want to emphasize that because I think that's a place where we could really do some cool work. On the participation, of course I have a comment on this. I wanted to emphasize that I think I appreciate the work that the committee's been doing. I do want to emphasize that I think it also requires a kind of cultural mindset shift on the part of the board to think about. Oftentimes I hear different people talk about wanting to give space to people or let them feel heard. And that's sometimes the way people talk about the CPAC. Like, let's let parents feel heard. And it's really different if you actually want to hear us. Like, if you actually think we can help you do your jobs better, that's a different mindset than just letting us talk. So I just want to encourage you to chew on that thought and think about how that plays out in the way you interact with the public. Related, on the same topic, the 3-minute rule, I appreciated that it said like equally enforced, because it's not. I'm often shut down and other people aren't. And that's okay. I mean, I talk a lot, but I think part of that goes into personalities too. And so personalities of people having to shut down. So you might think about a protocol for how that actually happens. Like, Barb doesn't want to shut people down because she's too nice, right? But she feels comfortable shutting me down. But so maybe there's it's okay. But maybe there's a clap, something that makes it not personal and just something automatic that's equally as high. That's thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I did see you sing.
I think we're all getting giddy. I think it's time for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Thank you. Have a wonderful
Have a good
July.
July,
Oh,
guys.
wow.